Hello there and welcome. My name is Carolyn Taylor, and I'm an instructional strategist with Wayside Publishing. I'm very happy to have you with us today. We're going to be looking at backward design and help you see what it means to plan with proficiency in mind through backward design. So we're going to start out with a little simulation. So imagine that out of the blue, you get a text from your friend saying, pack your bag, we're going on a trip. And that's all the information you have. You don't know where you're going or what you need to bring along. And you have to quickly pack that suitcase with the items that you think you might need. So take a moment, if you would, just to pause the video. And I'd like you to jot down about 10 items that you would pack using only the information I just gave you. Surprise, your destination is the land of the midnight sun, where you'll enjoy an Alaskan cruise. Now, would this destination allow you to experience what you were hoping for when you envisioned going on this trip? For example, you might have packed for a trip to stay at a warm, sunny beach where your goal was just to lay out and relax. Or maybe you packed for a trip to museums and nice restaurants. In other words, did the destination match your goals? So, how does this relate to language teaching? Think about your first experience or your even current experience as a language teacher, and focus, if you would, for a moment on the time that you spend planning for instruction, whether it's a whole unit for a week or even just a class period. Do you always know what you're packing, or in other words, what you're teaching towards and how you'll get there? If we start planning for class periods or choosing activities without knowing where we're headed or what we'll do when we get there, sure, we're going to get some things right, but we'll miss some important pieces and even add extra items that don't really serve a purpose. This isn't the most effective way to get students to their destination. To design our students' language learning path and intentionally move them forward on their journey to proficiency, we need to backward design our curriculum, our courses, our units, and our lessons. As Wiggins and McTighe point out, if we don't backward plan, we run the risk of covering material in the textbook and activity-oriented teaching, neither of which optimally benefits students. And I have a feeling most of us can relate to this. I know I can. For those of us who have felt pressured to cover curriculum and lost sight of the destination, or maybe got lost in activities that didn't lead to our desired goals, I'd like you to take a moment to think about how this experience made you feel. And as a French teacher, there were jobs that I had where I felt like the focus was mainly on keeping up with where I was supposed to be in the textbook so that my students would be ready to take the same district assessment as their peers. And unfortunately, the content of the chapters was not based on backward design. So I felt constricted and I had very limited room for creativity. I loved planning fun and engaging lessons and activities for my students, right? We all do. Unfortunately, not all of these activities work together in a planned, intentional way to build my students' proficiency. I remember when I would have students do a fashion show. They dressed up and they walked the runway and narrated their outfits. And they had a lot of fun, and sure, they used the French language, but for the amount of time we spent on it, it didn't really build understanding towards my overall unit goals. What's more is that it didn't incorporate multiple modes of communication. So, what does backward design look like in terms of our classroom and our practice? So, first of all, there are 3 steps to backward design. So, that first step or stage is where we identify those desired results and we establish those goals, right? So, where are you going and what are you going to be able to do once you're there? And then stage 2 is then determining acceptable evidence, right? So, what does it mean to have met those goals, right? So, how are we going to know what they're able to do when they reach that destination? And then, third of all, is when we plan the learning experiences and instruction. So, what does it take to get there, and what do we need to do specifically to meet those goals? So notice how in this process, we're really starting with the big picture first. We're identifying the goals that we want students to reach by the end of the unit. And while our tendency as teachers is to think about the day-to-day and the types of activities we'll do in class, it's really important for us to start with that big picture first so that we know where we're headed. We don't want to jump right in with planning activities, just like we don't want to plan our suitcases or pack our suitcases before we know where we're going or what we're going to do once we get there. So in stage 1, let's start by setting our purpose and goals for our unit. So first, the essential questions, right? The essential questions are what makes the unit meaningful. They set the stage for the why we are doing the unit and for what purpose. So what important questions will this unit help us answer? And keep in mind that a good essential question is open-ended and can be answered differently for different people. If it had a correct answer, it probably wouldn't be an essential question. So next, let's look at our setting the objectives. So what will learners know and be able to do by the time they get to the end of the unit? So step 1 of backward design is easily done for users of EntreCulturas and EntreCultures. Each unit opener section will list the essential questions and the unit goals for that particular unit. And here we have an example from Unit 1 of EntreCulturas. And you can see that in the top right-hand corner, we have essential questions posted for us already. And then in the bottom left corner of the page, we already have our unit goals laid out for us. They detail what students should know and be able to do by the end of the unit. And here we have a French example also from the Level 1 book. So this is EntreCultures, Level 1, Unit 1. And you can see that the essential questions and unit goals are in the same place they were with the Spanish pages. And not only does this make unit planning focused for teachers, students are also able to see right from the beginning of the unit where they'll be headed. And a useful unit opener activity with students could be to ask them to reflect on these essential questions before they dive into the unit. You might also ask them what they feel they need to learn throughout the unit in order to be able to meet those unit goals and answer those essential questions. All right, so now we're ready to move on to step 2 of backward design. And this is where we'll be determining acceptable evidence. In other words, deciding on how we'll assess student success. So how will we know if our students have met those objectives? We want to know what success looks like before we get to the end. And with world languages, we also want to make sure that our students are meeting our expectations in all 3 modes of communication, right? So in interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. And one way to do that is by planning an integrated performance assessment. So let's look at the context of an EntreCulturas and an EntreCultures integrated performance assessment. So each unit of both our EntreCulturas and EntreCultures series contains a summative integrated performance assessment at the end of the unit. And this is a great planning tool to use for step 2 of backward design. These assessments engage learners in all 3 modes of communication by providing an interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational task, and they're all interconnected. Here, students are able to demonstrate what they know and can do by communicating in the target language. These assessments also inform our instruction and our planning. Since the assessments are already aligned with the essential questions and unit goals, we can help ensure student success in developing their language proficiency and their intercultural growth. Now, here's an example from EntreCultures, level 1, and this is unit 4. The assessment looks very similar to the Spanish, where students engage in all 3 modes of communication, and they do so by completing interconnected tasks. And remember that the summative assessment descriptions are right in the textbook, so students are able to look ahead at any time and get an idea of what they'll be expected to know and be able to do when it comes time for them to complete their integrated performance assessment. And in addition to the unit summative assessment, each unit will contain 1 to 2 formative assessments depending on the level of EntreCulturas. And these act as a guide, sort of guideposts along the way to the summative assessment. And they'll contain tasks in all modes of communication and will let you know if students are on the right track. And the results of these assessments will guide your teaching and your planning as you move through a unit. It'll help you decide what you might need to retool or reteach to be sure that students are making the progress they need and developing their proficiency. So here's an example of a French formative assessment, and notice the can-do statements that you see in the teal boxes. Use these to your advantage when planning. These should help guide your decision-making when it comes to how you use class time with your students so that you're setting them up for success. Stage 3, now that we have a purpose and goals and a clear idea of what successful evidence of learning will look like with the assessments, now we can start planning the learning experiences that students need to meet our goals. So now the teacher magic happens. So think how much more effective our lessons are going to be now, right? Our objectives, our assessments, and our lessons will all be aligned. And here are some important questions for you to consider when you're designing your students' learning experiences. You can use this as a checklist or a reminder of what effective learning experiences look like, right? And remember that you can pause this video and jot down your thoughts that you find to be useful. Which of these learning experience descriptions do you feel are most important for you to incorporate? Maybe there are some that you want to incorporate right now, maybe others you want to work toward incorporating. So spend some time thinking about these questions and how they can help you plan and execute your instruction for proficiency. Now, what does step 3 look like in terms of EntreCulturas and EntreCultures? Well, you can see that for each section of the textbook, there are a variety of activities in each mode of communication. And in a perfect world, we would have all the time that we need to do these tasks with our students. But the reality is, we probably won't be able to get to everything. And this is why backward planning is so important. Now that we know the goals for our unit and the tasks that students will need to complete on the formative and summative assessments, we can make educated decisions about which activities will make the best use of our time to prepare our students. Let's look at this example from a Spanish unit. So activity 31 on the left side looks very similar to an activity that students will do on the upcoming summative assessment. So I would mark that as a high priority. And then for the second part of activity 31, students are having a conversation. And maybe we've already done many interpersonal tasks in class at this point, and it could be more important to focus on something else. So I would mark this as more of a lower priority. Okay. Now, when planning a trip, the goal of my trip and the list of activities or sites we'll see on my day-to-day planning. In essence, we can look at each planning in a very similar way. I can draw on the context of the established unit goals and the assessments to help guide and inform my decisions as I plan. And by using backward design, I've taken a lot of the guesswork out of the lesson planning and saved myself time in the long run. I wanted to share with you some quick tips to get started. I think first of all, start small, right? You would fly a small plane before you'd ever attempt to pilot a jumbo jet, right? I'd say take a test run. Do one class, maybe one prep, just one unit to try it out. You don't have to do everything right away. Right? And then do something easy. Don't start by flying loops and doing tricks. Just start with the basics and pick something that'll be easy for you to do. Maybe pick a unit that you've already done before that you feel pretty happy with. And maybe you're going to pick your easiest or most flexible class. And then think about starting with just a basic plan. Grab a calendar and plot out your main route and how long it's going to take you to get there, and then start playing with the unit planner. Don't forget to start the engine and go, right? Sometimes we get so caught up in the planning because we think it needs to be perfect. Just really start, and then you can reevaluate that flight plan as you go. The beginning of this school year is an exciting, but it's an often chaotic time too. There's so much to do and very little time to get it done. But know that we're here to help you. We'll be releasing a guide with 5 easy steps to start your school year headed for proficiency. So you can scan the QR code that you see on the screen, and that will land you on our professional development page where you'll find the link to these quick tips and helpful supporting documents. And these will include printables that you can even hang in your classroom. Alternatively, if you don't want to use the QR code reader, you can access the information at the URL that you see below. So tinyurl.com/waysideplt. And also look for additional ongoing professional development content that'll be forthcoming on this page. And if you need assistance, please feel free to reach out to our professional learning team at professionallearning@waysidepublishing.com. We're here to support you and help you in any way we can. And finally, as we draw our session to a close, I wish you all a fantastic school year ahead. Thank you for coming along on our trip.